Over the next few years, there will be massive worldwide spiritual awakenings. Purification is happening collectively to the entire human race, and it's happening individually in every single person's life. There are a number of conversations between me and Jesus about pre-birth planning, including the question that you just put to me. Quantum pre-birth plans are formulated by the soul. The soul group is a collection of souls who are at more or less the same stage of evolution. Spirit guides, angels, ascended masters. These are very real. Everybody has their own council of elders. These are the wise, loving, very highly evolved beings who oversee your personal evolution. The Earth is going through what we call an Ascension Process. We're on our way to fifth density, which is a vibration of unconditional love and oneness consciousness. The first implication, and this is a big one, my focus is on something called pre-birth planning. And what happens there is that when the soul decides to have an incarnation on Earth, or it could be somewhere else, the soul formulates a quantum set of pre-birth plans. So the way to think about this, my wife is a channel. She channels a group consciousness that we call the beings of light. And the way they've explained it to us, they say, imagine that you have a stack of sheets of paper in front of you. Each sheet in your stack represents a complete set of pre-birth plans. So every individual has their own stack of sheets of paper. The sheets toward the top are the highest vibrational life plans. Those are the ones where most of the learning is done through love, peace, and joy, not so much through pain and suffering. Sheets at the bottom of the stack are the opposite. Those are the lowest vibrational pre-birth plans. That's where most of the learning is done through pain and suffering, and not so much through love, peace, and joy. So everybody's got their stack, and the average person is bouncing up and down in their stack all day long, depending upon what their vibration or their frequency is. Now, that stack of sheets of paper, these quantum pre-birth plans, these are formulated by the soul. The soul lays down what you could call certain karmic tracks. These are themes the soul wants to explore, things it wants to do, things it wants to learn. So there's a general intention that is set by the soul. And then in consultation with God or Source, ascended masters, angels, spirit guides, the life plan for the upcoming incarnation, the personality, is put into place in greater detail. And then the soul creates the personality. That would be you, me, everybody listening. The personality is a portion of the soul's energy that will go into a physical body. The soul informs the personality of what the pre-birth plans consist of. At that point, the vast majority of people say something along the lines of, that sounds wonderful, I agree to the plans, let's go ahead with the incarnation. There's a small percentage, however, who start to experience human emotions like fear or doubt, principally fear or doubt that too much is being taken on. If you express fear or doubt, you are reassured by your soul, your guides, God, that these plans are for the highest good of all beings. And because the beings who are reassuring you are just radiating complete compassion, unconditional love, joy, you feel their unconditional love for you, it reassures you. And so most of the people who express fear or doubt now agree, and they say the plan sounds good, let's go forward. But there's a small percentage of the percentage who express fear or doubt who continue to express fear or doubt. If you do that, then the plan is amended until it's acceptable to you. So bottom line, nobody is forced to incarnate, and nobody is forced to experience anything that they don't want to experience.
It's interesting picturing fear and doubt existing for the soul on the other side. Is this a linguistic thing? Is this just the best words we have to describe? Is it just hesitancy or something? Yeah.
You could call it hesitancy. I would not say that the soul itself is experiencing fear or doubt. I would say that this small portion of its energy that is going to be the incarnate personality, that's experiencing fear or doubt. We're sort of splitting hairs here, and it's difficult to put this kind of thing into words. But the soul, as I understand it, is complete equanimity, unconditional love, non-judgment. but the portion that's going to incarnate can start to experience some lower vibrational human emotions before the incarnation actually starts.
What does understanding this then imply for the way we navigate our lives?
Well, the first implication, and this is a big one, is that nobody is ever a victim. Because obviously, if you plan your biggest challenges yourself, if you agree to them at the soul level, then nobody is doing anything to you against your will. Now, that is a difficult idea to wrap your mind around if it's the first time you're hearing it, or maybe even the 10th time. And if you've been through some very traumatic experience where it certainly appears that you've been victimized, that can be quite a challenging concept to work with. But it's very helpful to those who do work with it and who eventually embrace it, because it will pull them out of victim consciousness. Victim consciousness, as I understand it, is literally the single lowest vibration a human being can be at. And it tends to be self-perpetuating, because when you believe yourself to be a victim, you vibrate at the frequency of victim. When you vibrate at the frequency of victim, you're energetically stating to the universe that you're a victim. Well, whatever energetic statement you make to the universe, it always responds in the same way. It always responds by saying, yes, that's right, you are. So if you state energetically to the universe that you're a victim, it says, yes, you are, and it brings to you more experiences that seem on the surface to confirm to you that you are, in fact, a victim. The way to break out of that negative self-perpetuating cycle is to come into the understanding, the awareness, that you are the tremendously courageous soul who planned your biggest challenges before you were born. The understanding that you are not a victim is a huge leap in vibration. So we'll come back to the stack of sheets of paper analogy. Once you make that leap, now you've jumped up, halfway through the stack of sheets of paper. And then much more of the learning can happen through love, peace, and joy. And there's a lot less pain and suffering. It also helps you navigate in terms of healing. It's tremendously healing on an emotional, spiritual, psychological level. And just on a day-to-day basis, and I speak for myself here, a lot of times when I'm going through the day, if something challenging comes up, something that is not what the personality of Rob would ideally prefer, I'll say to myself, okay, if I planned this before I was born, why might I have done that? And the asking of that question immediately carries me to a place where I'm looking for deeper purpose and deeper meaning. So whatever annoyance I might be feeling at whatever it is that's going on around me, now I'm looking past that. I'm looking for the deeper meaning. And when I'm able to find it, then I can learn the underlying lesson in a much more conscious and much less painful manner. Essentially, it accelerates spiritual evolution.
Question about that, and I do want to get into the work around challenges, because I know there's a significant depth to your work in around that space. But at this juncture, destiny, it seems if the soul's got a plan, everything's preordained. No destiny, free will.
Yeah, so this is a very important point. I want people to get this. When we talk about things being planned before we're born, it almost always means planned as a potential, a possibility, maybe a probability, occasionally a probability so high as to be almost certain. But very, very few things are planned as absolute certainties. Now, there are a few. For example, your choice of parents. Obviously, once you're born, you can't change that. Your parents are whoever they are. Or if you plan, for example, to be born with a physical handicap that can't be treated by medical science, which is something you would know before coming into body, then short of what we call a miracle, you'll have that handicap for the duration of that lifetime. So things like that are written in stone. But 98% of what we experience here is planned as a potential. And whether or not it actualizes depends upon your free will decisions. So I like to illustrate this point with a hypothetical story. Let's say that there's a soul, and we'll just call this person Sally. And Sally has had a number of past lives in which she made certain plans before she came into body, but then when she got here, she had a tendency to defer to the wishes of others. Not an unusual way to live. She has a life of you at the end of each of those lifetimes, as we all do. And she will see that she has this tendency to defer to the wishes of others. So she resolves in the pre-birth planning to do something about this. She decides to carry that tendency energetically back into body, not for the purpose of expressing it, but rather for the purpose of healing it. So that's Sally's pre-birth intention. Now let's say that there's another soul in her soul group, and I'll call this person George. And George has had a number of past lives in which he had the opposite tendency. He tended to dominate others. He told people how to live their lives. He exercised power in inappropriate ways. George has a life review at the end of each of those incarnations. He sees that he has this tendency. And like Sally, he decides to carry it back into body energetically for the purpose of healing it. So that's his pre-birth intention. Now, because they're in the same soul group, Sally knows about George's plan. So she goes to him before either one of them is born, and she says something like, "Hey, George, I'm taking back into body the tendency to defer to the wishes of others for the purpose of healing it. I see that you're taking back into body the opposite tendency to dominate others, also to heal it. Why don't we make a pre-birth plan that we will meet and marry sometime around the age of 30? And our intention here will be that I will learn to stand up for myself, and you'll learn to respect the wishes of others. And we know that this marriage will be turbulent, but our hope is we'll both be able to learn what we would like to learn." And George says, "Sally, this is a great idea. Let's do it." So that's their plan. Now, let's say that when Sally is in body and 25 years old, she gets a job with an employer who treats her very unkindly, is running roughshod over her, treating her with a profound lack of respect and kindness. And let's say that Sally marshals her internal resources and she takes a stand. She says to her boss, "Stop. If you want me to continue working here, you must treat me with respect, kindness, and compassion." In the moment Sally takes a stand like that, there's a tremendous increase in her vibration. If she can sustain the heightened vibration until she's 30, now one of two things is going to happen. Either she and George will never meet, because by virtue of the law of attraction, her vibration is up here, his is down here, they go right by each other. Or if they do meet, there's just one date and then nothing comes from it, again, because their vibrations are so dissimilar. So in this hypothetical story, Sally has used her free will to learn the planned lesson to stand up for herself, and that in turn has obviated the need for the planned challenge, the turbulent marriage. So it simply never happens. Now, somebody is going to say, well, what about George? Doesn't he still have to learn his lesson? Yes, he does. And he will draw to himself another relationship or some other set of circumstances that will give him that opportunity. And if he doesn't learn it then, he'll draw another relationship or set of circumstances to himself and another, and it will keep going like that until he learns the lesson that he planned to learn. But that hypothetical shows you this intersection between free will and pre-birth planning.
Inspired soul, I just wanted to take a quick second out to thank all of you that are subscribed to the channel. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. Thank you so much for your incredible love and support for everything we're doing here, championing love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon. 2 episodes like this coming out every week, and it helps with absolutely everything we're doing here on the channel. Thank you so much in advance for your love and support. Back to Rob in today's episode. Brilliantly explained. Thank you so much for that. And also just, brings home the importance of us, I don't want to put it in air quotes, but doing the work. Because you don't have to go through all the rigmarole if you can address things in a tidy fashion. Touch wood. No. Oh well, order in chaos. Life is often a mess. There's a couple of interesting things in there. I do want to get into soul groups because you mentioned that, but I would love to double click on that for a sec. But just before we do, it's usually at this juncture, because what we're talking about is supremely empowering, because it's on one hand, it's like, hey, these are your challenges, and you picked them. And, let's put on the rubber gloves. But it does definitely challenge some listeners' sensibilities at this point, when it basically, because on one of the implications of what we're discussing is there's this connotation of we're perhaps absolving certain people of their wrongdoings. And that, I've noticed in the comments before, really triggers people.
This is something, so I should explain here. The way I researched people's pre-birth plans in my 3 books, 2 ways. One, by working with mediums and channels who, in one way or another, could access a person's pre-birth plan. And then second, through the form of hypnosis I practice, which is called a between lives soul regression. In that kind of session, people can talk to their council of elders, the beings who oversee their evolution, and ask literally any question they have about their life plans or any other subject. So I'm drawing from these 2 different sources of information. In regard to collaborating with the mediums and channels, one of the channels I work with, a wonderful woman named Pamela Crabbe, channels Jesus. So in my books, there are a number of conversations between me and Jesus in which I ask him all sorts of questions about pre-birth planning, including the question that you just put to me. So I asked him at one point, if somebody grossly mistreats another person, even if it's part of a pre-birth plan, it is completely consensual at the soul level, does that person not accrue karma? And he said, no, that's not the case. The person does accrue karma anyway. So they're still held accountable. It may not be something that's visible to the person who has been harmed, but there is karma involved in that.
In my research of today's interview, I came across your thoughts on Hitler and his birth plan and how that all manifested. Touchwood, at the risk of taking a dark turn, any chance you could illuminate us a little bit?
Yeah, people frequently ask questions about evil. And when they ask questions about evil, they invariably ask about Hitler, who is sort of seen as the personification of evil. So I've been curious about that as well. And I've asked Spirit, what happened in Hitler's lifetime? What was Hitler's pre-birth plan? And the answer I got, which might be quite surprising to your audience, is that the plan his soul came up with was actually for him to be a great spiritual leader. And his soul equipped him with certain gifts that were intended to bring that about, gifts of oratory, rhetoric, charisma, and so on. There was actually, as I understand it, a specific option in Hitler's pre-birth plan for him to use his painting, his artwork, to spiritually inspire people. You might know he was quite a good painter. But again, everybody has free will. So Hitler, as I understand it, had a very traumatic childhood, and he used his free will to respond to the pain that caused him by going 180 degrees away from the intentions of his soul. So he took the gifts that he was given, and rather than use them as a spiritual leader, he used them to do what he went on to do. People have free will, and that was his free will decision. Now, the other question people often ask about Hitler is, well, where is he now? What has become of him? When I asked that question, I was told he's back on the other side, and he's essentially in a state of ongoing psychosis. Apparently, he died in a psychotic state, and that has continued on the other side. He's aware of all the harm he caused people, and he's apparently punishing himself again and again by recreating the experience of his physical death in that lifetime, which apparently was quite painful in some way. So he's doing this as a form of self-punishment. Now, the important thing to understand here, he's not being punished by God or some council or being external to him. He is loved unconditionally by Source, just as all of us are. And he's surrounded by loving guides and angels who are beaming love and light to him, but he just can't perceive the love and light. So that's available to him. And when he eventually gets to the point where there's at least a little bit of self-forgiveness so that he stops recreating his painful physical death, then presumably he'll choose at some point to move into that light. Then there will be a life review, And then most likely he'll feel he's got a tremendous amount of karma to balance, and he'll get to work on balancing that. But right now he's just punishing himself, apparently.
From this vantage point, karma becomes almost like a ledger of your soul's dynamics and energetics from between lifetimes. Can you take a moment to describe karma to us from your vantage?
My understanding of karma is that it's essentially just a feeling of incompletion. So, I've mentioned the life review. At the end of each incarnation, we have, if we choose to, we have a life review, and almost everybody chooses to. And in the life review, you see how you did in terms of learning all the things that you had intended to learn. And the major relationships and challenges are shown to you again in sort of a holographic movie in which you can immerse yourself. And in this movie, you can relive everything you felt at certain times. But what's really powerful as a teaching tool is that you can feel what you caused other people to feel. And that can be a wonderful, ecstatic experience. It can also be torturous, depending upon how you caused other people to feel. So a lot of people will come out of the life review feeling incomplete with certain experiences or themes. Just to take a hypothetical example, let's say that there are two people who had a lifetime together in which one was ill and the other was the caregiver. When they have their life review at the end of that incarnation, they'll see the caregiving relationship portrayed. Maybe they will feel complete with that experience, maybe they won't. If they feel complete with it, then there is no karma, and they'll plan something completely new and different. But if they feel incomplete with the caregiving for any reason at all, that feeling of incompletion is the karma. So let's say they feel that way. How do they balance the karma? Well, the easiest thing to do is just trade places. Now the one who was ill will plan to be a caregiver. The one who is the caregiver will plan to have a physical illness. Basically, what's happening here is that we want to experience both sides of every coin. And at the soul level, we don't judge experiences as good or bad. We just look at all of them as opportunities for growth, healing, expansion, and learning. That's essentially what's going on.
Okay, I've mentioned this a couple of times now. Let's double click on soul groups, because those two individuals, they were doing it one way, then they're going to do it another way. Can you describe soul groups, soul families? You mentioned also the Council of Elders. Happy to take this one at a time, or however you'd like to sort of describe just the nature of interpersonal dynamics. Personal is personality. I don't know how to ask the question.
I understand what you're asking. So a soul group, as I understand it, is a collection of souls who are at more or less the same stage of evolution, which is another way of saying they're at the same vibration, more or less. People always ask how many souls are in a soul group. My understanding is average is 25 to 75. So you and the other members of your soul group will incarnate together repeatedly, playing every conceivable role with and for each other. You will be husband and wife, mother and daughter, father and son, brother and sister, best of friends, teacher and student, mortal enemies, even murderer and the one who is murdered. And again, at the soul level, there's no judgment of any of these roles. They're just characters on a stage. It's a role that you're playing in a lifetime so that you can learn the lessons that are underlying the roles. The Council of Elders is something completely different. In the Between Lives soul regressions I do as a hypnotist, and you can do a Between Lives regression either as a private session, or we have many ongoing workshops where we do them as a group. We take people to their Council of Elders. These are the wise, loving, very highly evolved beings who oversee your personal evolution. And everybody has their own Council of Elders. Their level of evolution is so advanced, it's really beyond human comprehension. These are beings who are just filled and overflowing with love and wisdom and compassion. When somebody gets in front of their council, it depends on whether they're doing a private session or in a group workshop. In a private session, they'll have filled out an intake form. They'll tell me in the intake form, these are all my questions for my council. And so we'll go through them one by one. And as the counsel responds, the client will tell me what they're saying, and then I'll make suggestions. Well, since they said that, why don't you ask them this? Yeah, since they said that, let's ask about this other thing. And we just go back and forth in a conversation like that. Now, in a group workshop, since there's more than one person, it can't be interactive like that. So I have a very long and extensive series of questions that covers all the major areas of everybody's life. And I prompt the whole group to ask their counsel these questions. So everybody's asking the same questions, but they're getting individualized personal responses from their own counsel. The questions are things like, what is my life plan with my mother, my father, other significant people? If there is a need for healing in any of those relationships, how can you bring about that healing? Then we'll go into life challenges, ask the counsel about something you consider a major life challenge, past or present. Did you plan this? And if so, why? And then there's some more, you could call them general interest questions that are really quite captivating. We ask things like, what is your mission? What are the gifts you were given to share with the world? Why did you plan to be male, female, or androgynous in your current lifetime? One of my personal favorite questions is, what is your role on the other side? What do you do on the other side when you're not in body? And this elicits all kinds of amazing answers. And they tend to fall into two categories. One is, it'll be something directly related to what the person is doing in this lifetime. And so it's not surprising at all. It's a confirmation to them that this is their eternal identity, so to speak. The other category, where there are just as many answers, is the opposite of that. Their role on the other side is something that is totally unrelated to who they are and what they're doing in this incarnation. And never in a million years would you guess that this is what they do on the other side. I'll give you a couple interesting examples. My maternal grandfather, when he was here in a body, he owned a retail furniture store. I've talked to him since he transitioned. I said, what do you do on the other side? And he said, I'm a scientist who researches the properties of water. Never in a million years would I have guessed something like that. And I have an uncle on my father's side of the family. When he was here in body, he was a salesman at a men's clothing store. And his only interest outside of work, and I mean literally his only interest, was going to the racetrack and betting on the horses. That was his great joy and passion in life. He never wanted to travel anywhere. He never wanted to do anything else. Well, I've talked to him since he returned to the other side, and I said, what do you do over there? And he said, I'm an intergalactic explorer. So the exact opposite of who he was while he was here in a body. Never in a million years did I see that coming. So we ask questions like this, and people end up with all sorts of illuminating responses that give them insight into who they are, what they do on the other side, why they're in this incarnation, why they decided to do something similar to what they do on the other side, or why they decided to do something completely dissimilar to what they do on the other side.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines.
He's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing, and Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say I've Absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. Thinking about roles and experiences on the other side is truly bendy for the mind, because it's like you said, it's non-physical. I just never even contemplated that just on the other side that I would have a job description. It's really interesting to think about. What is the nature of my soul? Yeah.
I'll add, I've asked, what do I do when I'm on their side? And the response I got was, you are a counselor with a specialty. You work with souls who are at an inflection point in their evolution. They can go this way or they can go that way, and you advise them as to which direction is the best route to take. So they're sort of at a point where I can have a maximal impact on their evolution through giving them wise counsel. And that really is the nature of the between lives soul regression. A lot of the people who come to the workshops and the private sessions, they're at an inflection point in their life. They can go this way or they can go that way. And the answers they get from their council of elders will often be determinative as to which choice they make. So it's that same idea of having an impact at an inflection point.
Rob, you mentioned the council of elders. Angels, other beings, like your interpretation of any, I don't even know what you could encounter, what's supporting you from the other side. Any insights in that space, please?
I think that there are probably many categories or types of non-physical beings that we just know nothing about. But the ones that people have commonly heard about, spirit guides, angels, ascended masters, these are very real. And everybody has their spirit guides, everybody has guardian angels, everybody has at least one ascended master, if not several, who are working with them. The full support of the universe is behind every single person and every single incarnation. We come into body, and due to the limitations of the five senses, we perceive ourselves as these separate beings, cut off from God, cut off from each other, a lone figure in a hostile world. And I certainly understand why it looks that way, but really that's the opposite of what is going on here. There's just one being in existence in the whole universe. You can't ever be separate from the one, although you can create an illusion in which you appear to be separate. And while we're having this experience of separation, the full support of the universe is behind everybody. The most loving, highly evolved, wise, compassionate beings in existence are working with every single one of us. So we're not alone, and we're certainly not separate.
Rob, what is an ascended master?
An ascended master, as I understand it, is just a highly, highly evolved being. There's a particular ascended master, other than Jesus, in my books, who uses the name Aaron. Just to give you a feel for what an ascended master is, Aaron, that was his name in one of his previous incarnations. In his last incarnation, he was apparently a Theravadan Buddhist monk. And there was some kind of an episode that took place in Southeast Asia where someone was killed who was in close proximity to him, shot with an arrow or something like that. And he and the woman who now channels him in my books in this lifetime were both standing close to this person who was shot and killed. Neither one of them jumped in front of the arrow to prevent this person from being killed. Barbara, the woman who is the channel, felt enormously guilty about not preventing the death when she saw this in her life review. And that is something that led her to reincarnate again. Aaron, through his studies as a monk, had reached a point where he was beyond the human emotion of guilt. He did not condemn himself or judge himself in any way for not preventing this death. And that led to his liberation. There was no attachment left to call him back to the earth plane.
What drives or what governs the soul's desire? Because it's desiring to incarnate in some ways, but yeah, it seems like desire is quite deep.
Yeah, the soul wants the experience of certain things that it knows itself to be, but there's just not enough contrast on the other side to create the experience. So, for example, the soul knows that it is unconditionally loving, and in fact is actually made literally from the energy of unconditional love. It knows that, it understands that, but it wants to dive deeper into what unconditional love really and truly is. Well, there's not that much contrast to unconditional love on the other side, so there's not that much opportunity to go deeper. But if you come here to the Earth School, where there's quite a bit of what we could call not love, that contrast, the experience of the not love, that helps the soul to understand much more deeply what unconditional love really and truly is. So it's the experience, the experiential knowing of something like unconditional love. This is something that it comes up in the Conversation with God books that Neil Donald Walsh wrote. And God asked him in the book to explain it using the analogy of the white room. And I like to borrow this because it's very helpful. So God says to Neil, imagine that you are a white being in a white room. So you're white, ceiling is white, the floor is white, all the walls around you are white, everything in this room is white, including you. Now, if you are such a being in such a room, how do you know that you're white? Well, the answer is you don't. And in fact, you can't until you experience something that is other than white. Then once you've had that experience, then you understand much more deeply what it means to be a white being in a white room. This, I think, is what the soul is doing on the physical plane. We are love. We are in this realm of only love. That would be the white room. We therefore experience no contrast to ourselves. We therefore don't fully understand or appreciate who or what we are. And so we come into body in the Earth School for the experience of the contrast, the not love, because by the time you go home at the end of an incarnation, you understand much more deeply what unconditional love is, which is another way of saying you now have a much more profound self-knowing.
Yo, inspired soul. Just wanted to take a quick second out to hear from you. What are you taking away from today's incredibly deep conversation with Rob Schwartz? And I'm conscious this conversation like this should probably come with a trigger warning. What's triggering you? What's this eliciting within you? Your loved ones. There's so many rich conversations waiting to happen. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And if you have any questions for Rob of your own, please leave them in the comments below. I'm sure we'll have another chat with him again in the future. And I'd love to see what questions you guys have to ask as well. And with that, back to Rob in today's episode. If there was an infinite timeline, do we all end up becoming ascended masters through? Is that the plan? What's going on there?
That's my understanding. I mean, you can go off into other universes where perhaps the term ascended master isn't used, but the idea that you're getting at, that we all become enlightened beings, that's my understanding. Yeah.
You've used the term school. You've used the terms lessons. You've mentioned soul evolution quite a few times. So is it safe to assume that you picture this experience where we descend, I don't want to say descend, where we leave the white room as the white being to come down here to experience contrast, it's a learning environment? Is that Is that what you describe it as?
It's a learning environment. You could also say that it's an artificial environment. A lot of people use the word simulation, which I don't like because it sounds very sterile, but I think it's probably essentially accurate. So this is an artificial environment that has been created as a schoolhouse. It's structured and built on contrast, as we've been talking about. And through this enormous contrast that exists here, there are all sorts of lessons that you can learn in deeply meaningful, experiential ways that just aren't possible due to the lack of contrast on the other side.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even just contemplating black and white and then just picturing rainbows makes life seem really beautiful in and around that as well. I have to get to this question at some point. So we're building, you've got past lives, which we'll talk about past lives shortly, and you've got life in between lives as a soul. Now, you're doing this and then you're doing that and you're doing this and you're doing that and you're doing this and you're doing that. I think it's hard enough for us to wrap our heads around, one's purpose in one's life as they're going through it in this lifetime. But my question wanted to zoom out almost to the nth degree and sort of see your interpretation of why we keep doing this, like why we're incarnating, learning some lessons, spending some time in between, matching up with people, making soul plans, and then boom, coming down, having an experience, going back up. Overarchingly, what's the purpose of it all?
There are many specific lessons, specific reasons why we incarnate and why we plan challenges before we incarnate. But all of those reasons have a common denominator. If you distill them down, the common denominator is that we are learning lessons in how to more freely and fully give and receive love. That is the bottom line reason why every single person is here in the Earth School. And some of the more tragic, more painful things that happen here, one of the main reasons they're planned is that they have the effect of breaking open a person's heart, which is tremendously painful. It's a very difficult way to grow. But when the heart is cracked open, then it's open to receiving love and it's open to giving love. People often say, well, I've had so much suffering in my life. I would never have planned this before I was born. And we have to keep in mind here that your perspective when you're back on the other side planning a life is very, very different than when you're here in body. So I talk about the heart being broken open through life challenges. When you're on the other side and you're planning a challenge, you're very much aware that nobody is permanently harmed by anything that happens here. Now, you might or might not know that while you're here, but you do know that on the other side, and you're certain of it. You also know that the wisdom that comes out of the experience will be part of you literally for all eternity. Again, you might or might not know that while you're here, but you do know that when you're planning a lifetime. So from the other side, where you know that nobody's permanently harmed, the wisdom will be part of you for all eternity. And you also know you have the perspective that incarnation is actually very brief. From that perspective, it does make sense that some souls, not all, but some would plan very, very difficult experiences.
It's really interesting right now at this particular juncture in the conversation. I feel like everything's inside out. Question I had was, is there, and this is probably just my engineering background talking now, is there a typical, what does a typical pre-birth planning session look like? Some part of me is like, is there a templated form where you answer questions and stuff like that? Because you do seem to feel, I keep hearing the word challenge echoed quite a bit through our conversation. Does everybody, are there universal elements that all souls include in their plans? What are those universal elements?
Well, a challenge would be the universal element. The Ascended Master Aaron, who I was speaking about a moment ago, he says, quote, in one of my books, "You do not come into the incarnation for comfort or convenience." And that is most certainly true. If what you want is comfort or convenience, you would stay on the other side, where you have both of those things in ample supply. But people plan challenges when they come to Earth, and it's for the reasons that we've talked about and some other reasons as well. That's really the whole purpose, the blessing of coming here. In terms of what a pre-birth planning session looks like, there are a number of pre-birth planning sessions in my 3 books. in the working with the mediums and channels, I was actually able to go into people's pre-birth planning sessions and hear the conversations that took place when they planned their biggest challenges. So a typical conversation in very broad terms would be something like, someone is talking to one of their spirit guides. They're asked, what would you like to learn in the upcoming lifetime? The person states a few intentions of what they would like to learn. Then the guide will say something like, all right, if those are your objectives, you could do this, or you could have that experience, or this other one over here. And then there was some back and forth about which of these different paths will be most effective learning the lessons. And then when a path is chosen, then you need somebody else to play the key roles along that path. So other members of your soul group will now be brought into your pre-birth planning session. And you'll say to them, kind of like the conversation Sally had with George, here's what I'm planning. Here's what I want to experience. This is what I would like to come out of the experience. I need somebody to play this role and that role and that role to challenge me or to support me or to love me or all of the above so that I can accomplish my pre-birth intentions. Now, this is the part here where people find it difficult to accept, is that very often the person who's doing the pre-birth planning will ask somebody to play what we would call a negative role, to do something to really challenge them in some way. When another soul in your soul group gets a request from you to play one of these challenging roles, they respond generally in one of two ways. Either they say something like, I really would prefer not to treat you like that. Or they will say something like, I love you so much that I am willing to do this for you. If they say they don't want to treat you that way, then it's incumbent upon you to try to persuade them that this really is for your highest good. And if you're able to do that, and usually you are, they'll change their mind and they'll agree to play the role that you've requested. I'll give you an example. There's, in my first book, Your Soul's Plan, there's a chapter about the pre-birth planning of drug addiction. And it's the story of a soul who plans to have a heroin addiction while he's a young man here. The reason he wants to do this, he had a number of past lives in which he was able to create what we could call magical experiences for himself, not by being literally a magician, but simply through having intention and understanding the laws of manifestation. He led a very enchanted, magical life. He wanted to duplicate that kind of experience, but in a very different way. And he felt pre-birth that the experience of having a heroin addiction would create some of that same feeling for him. So he puts that plan into place. And then he goes to another soul in his soul group who he's worked with many times in many past lives. They know each other well. There's a lot of mutual love between them. And he says to her, would you be the mother who shepherds me through this very difficult experience? Now, it turns out she had just completed the last incarnation that she was planning for Earth. She was going to go on to something completely new and different. But because he made this request and because she loves him so much, she said, I agree. I will be the mother who guides you through this very, very difficult experience. And then they incarnate together. He had the heroin addiction and she guided him through it with a lot of love.
Who accrues the karma in an instance like that? Because you're persuading someone to support you through a challenging journey. And then obviously that, like you said, that mother was potentially done with incarnating in some ways of her own volition. But then she comes down and she has an experience, she potentially accrues more karma, right? But then how does the karmic balance in that work?
I'm not sure that she would necessarily accrue karma simply by being the parent of a child who has a heroin addiction. It would depend on what her intentions were behind her actions as his mother and whether or not she did things that caused harm to him or to other people. If she's lovingly guiding him through this very difficult experience that he's chosen, I'm not sure that in that case there would actually be any karma. And I think the same thing would be true for this young man. If the heroin addiction caused him in some way to harm others, then there would be karma, and he would know about that before incarnating. But if he simply had the experience of an addiction and it didn't lead to him harming others, then most likely there's not going to be any karma involved.
It's really interesting. Reflecting back on my question, I couldn't help but notice that there was a tinge of fear laden within the question. Is karma something to fear?
It depends on your perspective. If you're looking at it from the soul's perspective, no. Because again, you know that nobody is permanently harmed by anything that happens here. And you know that the wisdom will become part of you literally for all eternity. If you're looking through the eyes of a seemingly separate self, an incarnate personality who believes that they are separate from God and from everybody else on earth, then there probably would be some fear. I think that would be natural.
You've been doing this work for quite a few many years, Robert. Your life's work, and well, your soul's work as well. Now that we've uncovered that, is there a particular message or insight from all this regression work that you've done that you feel is most important for people to be hearing at this particular moment in time?
You know, the Earth, as I'm sure much of your audience knows, is going through what we call an ascension process, literally ascending, moving up dramatically in vibration. It's my understanding that Earth and everybody on the Earth has already ascended from the third dimension, or what really should be called third density, into fourth density. And we're on our way to fifth density, which is a vibration of unconditional love and oneness consciousness. That's the same vibration as the other side, our non-physical home. So we're actually going, those who stay on the planet are actually going home while staying in a physical body. So this is a universal event. The whole universe is ascending. And it's my understanding that to be in a body on Earth during an ascension lifetime is such an honor and such an amazing learning opportunity that there were actually approximately three times as many souls who wanted to be here now as available bodies. So you had to make a 1 in 3 cut in order to be here now. The reason I like people to know about this is that I think there's a very widespread human tendency to feel small, weak, powerless, helpless, insignificant, to think that your life doesn't matter, to think that you can't really make much of a difference in the world. Nothing could be further from the truth. The way they made that decision as to the 1 in 3 cut, you had to have something specific to offer the ascension process in order to be chosen to be in a body on Earth at this time. Now, maybe you know what that is, maybe you don't, but just know that you made a 1 in 3 cut to be here, and you were chosen because you have something specific to offer humanity's ascension process.
How do we go about uncovering our gifts in these lifetimes?
Well, of course, I'm a little biased, but I'm going to say the between lives soul regression. Ask your counsel, and they will tell you. They love to answer that question. But another way would just be to look at the things that naturally excite and interest you. You will naturally be drawn to the things that will utilize your gifts. Any activity that creates joy for you, there's something there that's part of your pre-birth plan. Look for something that I call time distortion. Time distortion is what happens when, and I'm sure everybody's had this experience, you're engaged in some activity that you really love doing, and you're so present in it, you're so immersed in it, that it feels to you like only 10 minutes have gone by, and yet when you look at the clock, it's 2 hours later. Everybody has had this experience with something. Whatever that is that's causing that kind of time distortion, there's something there that is utilizing your gifts as a soul. There's something important there that's connected to your pre-birth plans.
And how do we uncover what our mission is?
Well, again, you could ask your counsel of elders in a between lives soul regression. But intuition, again, what are you naturally excited about? What are you naturally interested in? What causes joy? What causes time distortion? Another way to answer that question would be to say, if you were independently wealthy and you could spend your time doing anything you wanted to do, what would you do for free? Whatever that is, it's probably something that is related to your mission in some way.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I do wonder, because there is I find crudely, like having spoken to so many people on the podcast, that also that their challenges also reveal parts of their gifts and their mission as well. It's almost like the parts that they go through to overcome, they invariably can end up supporting other people. I don't want to say downwind from there, but there's probably a better way to articulate that as well. So it's really interesting for those people that are potentially still at the idea of between lives regression and might be holding on to some level of healthy skepticism. What do you say to those people?
Well, here's an interesting story. A number of years ago, I did a workshop in Spain, a group, Between Lives Soul Regression. And two of the participants in the workshop were sisters. Now, the structure of the Between Lives regression is that we start with some preliminary steps to help you relax physically and mentally, and then I guide the person into a past life, and then you go from the past life to the Between Lives state where you talk to your counsel. Well, the two sisters go through the regression with everybody else in the workshop, and then the day came to an end. They told me about all of this the next day. When the workshop ended that day, they went out to dinner with each other. And of course, the first thing they said to each other was, well, what did you experience? And one of the sisters starts to tell the other about what happened in the past life. She was in England sometime in the late 1800s, I believe it was. And she starts to describe the people who were in her family, what the home looked like, what kind of furniture was there, what the grounds around the home looked like. And as she's talking, her sister's jaw drops wide open. Her eyes get really big. And the woman who's speaking says, what's going on? Why are you reacting to my past life like that? And she said, I saw exactly the same past life you saw. And I was your mother in that lifetime. So she saw a past life in which she was the daughter in this household in England. The other sister saw the same past life and was the mother. But the point is, they saw the same home, they saw the same furniture, they saw the same furnishings, they saw the same people, they saw the same grounds around the home. I mean, that was mind-blowing for them. And it convinced them and a lot of other people that these Between Lives regressions are real. What you are seeing is real. It might feel dreamlike, it might feel like imagination, but there's no other explanation for what happened with the sisters.
Thank you for answering that question. I'm conscious that the conversation we're having, even, I don't want to say a decade ago, but yeah, maybe even a decade ago, which is not that long, like 10, 15 years ago, would have been shrouded in a lot more taboo than it is today. Do you think that's a reflection of the ascension plan that you were referring to earlier? Like, is that because we're ascending that more information like this is becoming more and more available? Because I feel like for some people, even now, they'd be holding on to some element of the taboo around, maybe I'm not meant to know what's going on. You know, I'm not meant to peer around the other side of the veil.
I do think it's related directly to the ascension process. And I think what's happening in ascension, this is my understanding, there's a lot of light direct from source flooding the planet. The light is causing the ascension process. And the light is also triggering a worldwide spiritual awakening. So the number of people who we could now describe as quote unquote awake is multiples of what it was just a very short time ago. I think it's an exponential growth curve, and we're somewhere toward that point on the curve where it's just really starting to take off. And I believe that over the next few years, there will be massive worldwide spiritual awakenings. When I say awakening, I mean simply coming into the awareness, the knowing that you're more than a body, more than a personality, more than your thoughts, more than your feelings. You're an infinite, eternal, non-physical being who's actually made of light. That's the gist of what I mean by awakening. And, you know, in terms of people saying, well, maybe I'm not supposed to know about this kind of information or know about my pre-birth plan, that was actually a concern I had 20 years ago when I first started on this path. And I spoke with Jesus about it in one of the channeling sessions I was doing as research for the first book. And essentially what he said was, don't worry about that, because if it's for somebody's highest good not to know about what you're putting in these books, then one of two things will happen. They'll just never hear about you or the book you're writing. Or if they do hear about it, it will strike them as nonsense. They'll quickly dismiss it and go on to something else. Either way, no harm is done. So just don't worry about it.
At the risk of doing this entire podcast backwards, your experience, like you weren't naturally inclined to step into the work that you're doing now either. Can you just, sorry, I should have probably opened with understanding your story on how you got here a little bit. But yeah, do you mind sharing that just a little bit?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, I grew up in a Reformed Jewish family in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. And intellect was what was prized. Education was prized. My grandfather used to tell me, and I'm quoting now, the answers are in the books. It was about learning. It was about intellect. And making money was a value that was instilled in me. And so I went in that direction. That was what all my conditioning had taught me. And I pursued, income as best I could for a long time and felt very, very unfulfilled for a long time. And as I got closer and closer to the age of 40, it was something that I just couldn't overlook anymore. I had this knowing that I had come to Earth to do something quite specific that I wasn't doing, and it was time to get going. I couldn't put it off anymore. And so at the age of 40, I had what you could call an existential crisis. And to resolve it, first I took a very conventional route, as was my conditioning. I went for career counseling. I took the Myers-Briggs, and all of that was interesting, but it didn't tell me what to do with my life. I asked all my friends and family, what do you think I should be doing? Nobody had any helpful suggestions at all. And so almost out of desperation, I did something that at the time struck me as crazy. I went to see a psychic medium. But I thought, why not? It's an hour of my time, a little bit of money. If nothing comes out of it, there's no harm done. Well, that session changed my life. That was the beginning of the path that I'm still on to this day. So the session starts off, right out of the box, the medium says to me, your spirit guides are here. And I said, what is a spirit guide? I mean, I'd never even heard the term before. So she had to explain that to me. And then she said, your guides want to talk directly to you. And she started to channel them. I couldn't even understand what was going on. I mean, what is channeling? I never heard of that. She starts to channel them. And they say to me right out of the box, you planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born. I just shook my head and I said, why in the world would I have done something like that? And they said, you did this for purposes of spiritual growth. Now, this is where it got really interesting, because then they launched into this lengthy and detailed monologue where they went through my challenges one by one and told me why I had planned them. The reason this was so compelling is that I didn't tell them anything about myself during the session, and I hadn't told the medium anything about myself before the session. So here I am talking to beings who know literally everything about me without me telling them a single thing. That blew my mind wide open. And I came out of that session. I thought about this pre-birth planning concept constantly. And over the next few weeks, the effect that it had was that it created quite a deep healing, because it allowed me for the first time to see deeper meaning and purpose in experiences that I thought had been meaningless suffering. And then I thought, well, if this can create this kind of healing for me, surely it can do the same for others. That was when I first started to think about writing a book on the subject. And then within a short time of the session with the medium, two other profound experiences. I was introduced to a woman who can channel her soul, and I had the amazing opportunity to spend about 15 hours talking to her soul about pre-birth planning. Her soul just laid it out for me in detail. This is what pre-birth planning is. This is how it works. This is how it's done. That 15 hours of channeling formed the foundation of the books I went on to write. And the third experience, which is the most impactful of all, I had this experience in which I was home in my apartment having an average work day. It was the middle of a weekday afternoon. And I decided to take a break and go for a walk. So I'm walking down the sidewalk, and all of a sudden, every time I saw another person, this feeling of just profound unconditional love for that person washed over me. It was not a human kind of love. It was divine. It was transcendent. It's really beyond words to describe. It was so pure and so strong. The first person I saw when this started was a cab driver. He was just sitting behind the wheel of his cab waiting for a customer to come along. And I looked at this man who was a total stranger and just felt the most overwhelming unconditional love for him. And then I looked up, and there was a man's barber shop on the corner. The barber was cutting a customer's hair. As I looked through the window at these two gentlemen, there again, this just pure, overwhelming, unconditional love. And then I turned around, and there was a young woman, a mother, pushing a baby in a stroller down the sidewalk. And as I looked at her and the baby, there again, there's this pure, overwhelming, unconditional love. Everywhere I looked, every time I saw another person, I felt that kind of love for them. Now, as this was happening, you could say that I was caused to know. I was caused to know by a power much bigger than myself that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love. So when I said that earlier in our conversation, that knowing is a direct result of this experience. And that was the knowing that was given to me. What I didn't know at the time was why this was happening. That became clear a couple of years later. By that time, I looked at a lot of people's pre-birth plans for my first book, Your Soul's Plan. And every single plan was based on complete unconditional love for every person involved. And then I thought, aha, that experience a couple years ago walking down the street, the reason that happened is so that I would know that this was truth when I found it in my research. So that, in a nutshell, is how I left the corporate world and came to do this work that is not mainstream by any standards.
Thank you for sharing that. Coincidence, because that point that you just mentioned, it's like, the reason I had that experience was so that when I went to research, I had a basis for what was going on. Your relationship with coincidence, because having done this podcast for quite some time now, Touchwood, I find it really difficult to believe in coincidences now.
I don't think that coincidences are what we generally believe them to be. We think that they're random happenings and that there's no deeper meaning behind them. My understanding is that life in the universe is like a spider web, so vast and intricate, and every strand is connected, at least indirectly, to every other strand. So every soul in existence is somewhere in this infinitely large spider web. And when a soul that's over here moves a little bit, then all the souls that are over here, they feel the vibrations through the web. And these things that we call coincidence, they're being engineered intentionally by those in the non-physical who love and guide us. It's a way of steering us along our pre-birth path so that we can fulfill our intentions while we're here.
Thank you. That was beautifully put. And this reared its head a couple of times in what you were sharing. This knowing, the word knowing, I feel like intuition is profound, and I have so much respect and relationship building that work. And then, as a coach, having worked with over, 300, like going super deep with people one-on-one, people will come to coaching to rearrange their life. I'm sure people come to the regression work to, rearrange their life. And for myself in this, I just see it again and again in clients. It's that what they're living out is perfectly fine. Like it's a good life. Like they've got a good life, by all measures and standards. And yet there's this deep inner knowing that like there's something more that I'm yet to access or unlock. And I'm like, and part of me initially just goes, hey, you realize if you could just surrender that expectation, like expectations also lead to like a 1-for-1 with depression in many ways psychologically, right? If you could just ease the pressure of the expectation, you're good to go. Have you tried that? And it's like, yeah, and they'll end up, and most of them, yeah, I have. But this just keeps rearing its head. It's this knowing, and I heard that, like what you were saying before as well. Like you're in your 40s, and it's like this knowing just kept emerging for you. The texture, the nature. I just wanted to take a moment to just honor the knowing and just nerd out on the knowing with you. Your thoughts on the knowing. Is it your soul sort of knocking on your personality from the other side, kind of going, "Hey, knock, knock, knock"? Yeah. What are your thoughts on the knowing?
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put it. And what I see in my work, a lot of people will come to a between life soul regression when there's been a crisis of some kind. Something very challenging has happened, and they want to know, why did it happen? What does it mean? How should I respond to it? And a pattern that I've seen again and again in working with people is that the soul will start off initially knocking on the door, so to speak, in a very gentle and subtle way. And because we're all just compulsively busy in modern society, and there's so many distractions all the time, it's very easy to miss these whispers or these impulses from the soul. So if you don't hear them or you don't act on them, then they get a little bit louder and a little bit louder and a little bit louder. But if you continue not to hear them or not to act on them, then if there's something really important that you plan to do in the life, the soul or the guides will have to engineer something to really push you in that direction. Now, that's not a violation of your free will. You've asked them before you incarnated to keep you on your intended path. And if you're not on it, then they have your permission pre-birth to, give you a push. But that's when more difficult things start to happen. It's not a punishment by any means. It's intended to trigger awakening, questioning, and ultimately to get you back on the path that you yourself planned before you incarnated.
Yeah, I find myself sometimes saying this, and I always try and make sure it's not taken the wrong way, but I'm sure someone will at some point. But stress, that sort of existential stress in some ways, is a free life coach in your system. It's actually like guiding, it's like an internal guidance system that's bringing you back. Now, I'm just conscious that can be, there's so many myriads of pitfalls in that statement that it needs to be heavily caveated. But yeah, it's interesting. One of the things at this particular juncture in the conversation before we wrap up, you mentioned the quantum sheets before. And like those two individuals that potentially just completely missed each other because the lady ended up doing the work on herself early on through the challenges she was interfacing. You've talked about we're going from not actually third dimension to fourth dimension to fifth dimension, but third density to fourth density to fifth density. I'm curious, does it go beyond there as well even? But it seems like there's an opportunity for us to show up, to do the work. The planet's naturally going on its own ascension plan, as you said, but I'm sure there's work here for us. Like we were gifted this opportunity to be here, 1 in 3 of us. We were one of the 3 that you alluded to before. What does, I'm going to put it in air quotes, the work at this particular juncture for each soul harboring a personality look like at this particular moment in time?
So I talked a few minutes ago about how ascension is being created by light direct from source flooding the planet. The light has the effect of bringing to the surface, bringing to conscious awareness, everything unlike itself, which is to say everything of a lower vibration. That process is known as purification. Purification is happening collectively to the entire human race, and it's happening individually in every single person's life, whether they are consciously aware of it or not. So collectively, what that looks like, all you have to do is turn on the news and you can see what it looks like. We have seemingly more chaos, mayhem, fighting than at any time previously. It looks like things are getting worse, and in fact, they actually are. But that's only because these lower vibrational energies are being cleared to make way for the love, peace, and joy of fifth density. Now, in an individual's life, what this looks like is that your stuff, so to speak, is going to come up. You can't suppress it anymore. Suppression has never been a good strategy in any incarnation, but it's impossible in an ascension lifetime. The light is going to bring your stuff to conscious awareness, and you're going to have to work with it if you want to stay in body through the ascension process. So essentially, the way you work with it, you want to look for the deeper underlying meaning or blessing. When you find that, thank the energy, the experience, whatever it might be, for whatever it has taught you. Thank it sincerely if you can. Then bless the energy, set an intention to release the energy to the universe, and then give it to the universe. That's the gist of clearing the energies that need to be cleared.
That's really practical and very useful. Rob. Wow, this conversation. Brother, thank you so much for your incredible time and just sharing yourself so abundantly here today and answering all the nature of all my trippy-dippy questions. Really, really appreciate that. And I think for those that are tuning in, I'm glad, we got the opportunity to hear more about your life story and how you came to this as well, because I think it's really beautiful to witness just how obvious it is at this moment that it's not just this conversation that we're partaking in. It's your life's work and potentially your lifetime's work based on what your soul's communicated through to you as well. So I just want to extend my gratitude to you. Thank you for your time and energy today, but also for you being you, doing what you're doing, and all the books you've written. I read so many reviews on your books from people and how it's completely changed people's lives. People potentially wanting to check out and decided to stay after having read two books of yours, and it just a lot of gratitude for you doing the work that you're doing. Now, like we said, it's becoming more acceptable. But even like I said earlier, even 10 years ago, I imagine it would have been shrouded and more taboo. And there's a lot that you sort of have to carry or shoulder through those periods. So just really appreciate what you're doing, Rob.
Well,
thank you so much.
That's very touching. I really appreciate that. And I would say the same to you. Thank you for the choice you made to do this podcast and all the people you're talking to, all the wisdom you're bringing forward. I think your podcast is bringing a lot of much needed light into our world. And I thank you for having the courage to do it.
Thank you for your blessings. Yo, inspired soul, you made it through to the end of another incredible episode. Thank you so much for your inspirations to evolve. It is such an honor to be your brother walking this path by your side. Now, I just want to take a quick moment out to thank all of you that have enabled conversations like this to happen. This podcast has grown. We're past 100,000 subscribers now, just recently, touch wood. Thank you so much for all your incredible love and support. To all of you that are subscribed to the channel, everything you see around here is thanks to your blessings. As I like to say, it's all powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. So thank you so much for your love and support. To those of you that haven't yet hit subscribe, please do take a moment, hit subscribe, the button just below. It lights up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution as I say the word subscribe. So please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon. It helps with everything we're doing around here, championing love, positivity, and wisdom around the world. And on screen now for you to dive in even deeper, as if this wasn't enough medicine for your soul, an opportunity for you to dive deeper into this conversation around your soul's evolution here at the Inspired Evolution. So go on, take your pick, make your click, and I'll see you in the next one. Inspired to evolve onwards, upwards, and inwards. Go on, I'll see you in there.